This is a new thing for me, so if you're sitting behind the pole, like, I'm sorry. I'll try to move around a little bit. Like, some of you might be thankful for the pole, okay? So, like, you're like, oh, great, I can hear and I don't have to see him. That's awesome. So, anyway, um, man, it's so good to be here. And, if you're at home this morning for whatever reason, you couldn't get out or couldn't be here, or this is just your usual, let me just say, enjoy it because it's a little brisk out here this morning. It's getting more comfortable as the sun comes up. So for those of you, good choice. So for those of you sitting in the cool, well, I'm seeing some sun drip over there too. So good job. Us under the tent. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to put up with it. But anyway, hopefully you have had a chance to grab a cup of coffee, say hi to some folks, get a snack, maybe even play some games. I saw some people back here playing some Nine Square and other stuff going on. But before we go too far, let's just say it one more time because it's Easter. You know your role now, right? You know your role? He is risen. Very good, very good. Love it, love it. How about getting good news? Anybody like getting good news? Yeah, I love getting good news. And I'm not sure, like, the kind of news that you would say is good news, like what that might be for you. Like, some of you went to the spring Clemson football game, and that was good news for you. You were excited to see what was taking place on the field. Some of you like March Madness. Maybe that wasn't good news for you. Maybe it was a little bit of a letdown. I don't know. But I can think of some of the good news that has taken place in my life over the years. Where I think the first instance that comes to my mind is when I was 12, and I was out in the woods with my dad, and I shot my first deer. It was like a 6-point buck. And we had gotten down to follow up, to track the sign, to find where the deer had finally met its end. And we were tracking for what seemed like forever. And it was like, oh my goodness, are we ever going to find this deer? And I remember Dad going into these briars, like into this thicket. He said, you just wait out here, Tim. And I'm standing there, I'm waiting in anticipation, and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, from somewhere in the thick briars, I hear, I found him. I found your deer. And I was like, yes, right? I was super excited, super excited. Or later on when I was in high school and I applied to the college that I had felt like I needed to go to, and getting the acceptance letter and like it becoming a reality of like, you're going to go to the college that you've applied for, that this was like your choice, and you got accepted to that school. And I was stoked about it. But then on top of that, there was this scholarship that was offered to me. I had to write a paper for it, and there was only 5 people going to receive this scholarship. And I remember waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, I got the email or the phone call. I can't remember because it was a while ago. And they said, hey, your paper was selected. You are going to receive this scholarship. And I was like, yeah, right. That's good news. That's good news. Then I think it was 11 or so years after that, I met Ashley, and we got married. And, it became that time where, like, I was pretty sure we were ready to have a family, right? Ready to have kids. And in case you're wondering, like, when that time is, when you are single and you start grabbing other people's babies, like, or when you're married and you don't have any kids and you start grabbing other people's babies, your phrase that, some of you are chuckling. I misspoke there. So you start grabbing, that's a good sign, right? That's a good sign that maybe you're ready for one of your own, or like you can take care of a dog and it doesn't die. That might be another sign too. But we decided we wanted to have kids, and we were trying to have kids. I'm just going to leave it there. We were trying to have kids, and it took forever. And it was like, are we going to be able to have kids? And, I thought, if we, just try to have kids, it'll happen. And it took forever. And then finally, I remember getting a phone call. I think it was a call, or maybe it was a yell from the bathroom. I don't know. And it became apparent that we were our beautiful Kaylin, and I was stoked, excited over that news. Or maybe, over a year ago now. I need to get this up closer, guys. Does that help? A year ago now, I remember sitting in my office, and I remember praying about, God, what's next? What's next? And all of a sudden, where's Amanda? Amanda, you called me on the phone. And you said, Pastor Tim, the board has extended an invitation for you to come down to welcome. And I was ecstatic. I was like, honey, we get to go to South Carolina. And she's like, oh, no. But I love getting good news. And this morning, I want to tell you some good news. But it's not just good news. It's like the best news. The best news that any of us could ever hear or receive. And it begins with an early creed or a formal statement of Christian belief that we find in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 to 5, where the missionary church planter Paul writes to the church in Corinth, located in Lower Asia. He says, now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel. Of the gospel. You look it up, the word here is really fun. It's euangelion. Euangelion. With me, you want to speak some Greek this morning? Euangelion. Very good, very good. The gospel preached to you, which you have received and on which you have taken your stand. By this gospel you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. And here's the creed. This is what he says. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, who many of us know as Peter, and then to the 12. And my friends, this statement alone is the good news. It's the gospel of Jesus, that Jesus died for our missing the mark, for our willful choice to live our own desires that are contrary to God's plan, and that by his death he paid the penalty for those sins, the penalty that we deserve, because the wages or result or effects of sin is spiritual and physical death. Not only did he pay for those sins, but then just as God raised him from the dead, as evidenced by many eyewitnesses, not only in 1 Corinthians 15, but also elsewhere in the world, he raises us to new life, a new life in him that is free from the bondage of having to submit sin. That's the good news. That's the gospel. There's nothing that can be added to it or taken away. And Scripture says in verse 3, citing this early creed, that this gospel or good news is of first importance. That's a way of saying it is most important. And that's why we're gathered here today. That's why we're gathered here today. Did you know that? Because Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive. And I don't know how to respond to clapping. That doesn't happen. But yes, that's good. Jesus is alive. He's alive. And yet, tragically, there are some who do not yet know, yet believe, such as we see in this post-resurrection account that we read of in the book of Luke. The author and investigative journalist concerning the events of Jesus' life. And he writes in chapter 24, he writes in chapter 13, he says, now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, what are you discussing as you walk along? And they stood still, their faces downcast. And one of them, named Clopas or Cleopas, asked him, are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened there in these days? What thing? What thing? He asked. About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all of this took place. In addition, some of our women amaze us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but they didn't find his body. And they came and they told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And then some of our companions They went to the tomb, and they found it just as the women had said. But him they did not see. You know, as we pause here, the tragedy that we see in this instance is that all Cleopas and his companion seem to have all the information because they just told it to Jesus. They're kept from recognizing him. They're kept from recognizing him. If you look at the context, we know that Cleopas and his companion are disciples, or at the very least, they're hanging out with the disciples. From their language, it seems that they were witnesses of Jesus' miracles and experienced his powerful teaching. They even admit to knowing about the missing body from the tomb claimed by Mary. And yet, how are they responding? What is their response? Are they excited? Are they happy? Is that, yeah, high-fiving each other? Woo, yeah, Jesus is alive. He's not in the grave. Is that their response? No. No, that's their response. They're arguing. They're having an intense debate when Jesus himself approaches them. And what does it say? Their faces were downcast. Downcast because they had hoped. They had hope, past tense, implying their hope was gone. Their faith or belief in their rescuer was gone. The events over the last few days concerning Jesus' death, it was traumatic to the point where they couldn't even recognize when Jesus was standing right there in front of them. Begging the question, at least for me, what keeps us from recognizing Jesus? What keeps you and I from recognizing Jesus? Because while some may say it was divine intervention that kept these men from recognizing Jesus, which could be true, maybe it is true, I don't know. But when I look at this text and I look at this count specifically, I would suggest that it's more so the fact that these men couldn't see past their own doubts, past their own pain, past their own trauma, past their own need to be right, past their cultural norms, past their own ideas about what this rescuer would have to be. I would suggest that's what kept them from recognizing Jesus. Because isn't it true, my friends, that in the same way, these things also keep us from recognizing the truth? Isn't it true that many of us have also experienced hardships, suffering, difficulties, trauma? Maybe even in this present last year, in this pandemic, and because of those hardships, because of our experience, it has become difficult for us to recognize where Jesus is. We look around us and we're like, man, where's God? I don't see him. Things are so bad. Where is he at in the midst of all of this? Or maybe it's hard for us to understand how come God doesn't rescue us out of the situations we find ourselves in, the situations we see others in. Where is God here? I don't see him. Or maybe even more so, it's that we don't want to believe. Because if we believe, then we have to confront things and deal with things in our lives that we don't really want to deal with. So like these two companions fail to recognize who Jesus is and are left to struggle and debate about what all of life means. That's where they're at. We're like them. All these things are happening around us and we can't see Jesus, and so we feel like we're on our own to figure out what it all means. How do we move forward? I mean, what we see happening here, isn't that what we see happening, occurring far too often in the world around us? And yet I want you to know that Jesus loved Cleopas and his companion so much that he couldn't just leave them wondering. He couldn't leave them just debating about where he was in the midst of all this. Just like he loves us and cares about us far too much to leave us wondering where he is at. So Cleopas and his companion, they're sharing their struggles and their confusion about the traumatic events that are taking place in Jerusalem over the past 3 days. When Jesus, whose identity they're still unaware of, speaks up in verse 25 and he says, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. And I have to tell you, I wish I could have been there. I wish I could have been there when the light bulb in their minds started to flicker and brighten above their heads, because reality is they knew all this. They knew all this, and yet Jesus still had compassion enough to remind them that they could still have hope in their rescuer. And so he began to talk to them about Moses, right? That's what it says. He began to talk to them about Moses, of whom we read about in the book of Exodus, of who God used to deliver ancient Israel from the bondage and slavery under Pharaoh, who did mighty acts and spoke the words of God to the people, and in whom at the end of his life spoke of Jesus in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15 and verses 18. And he said, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me among you, from your own people. You must listen to him." And then he said, speaking for God, "I will put my words in his mouth." And then we read later in the book of Acts about Philip and Peter and Andrew, how they affirm this to be true. As Nathanael comes and he says, we've found the one of whom Moses wrote about in the law in John chapter 1, verses 44 and 45. We found him, the fulfillment of that scripture. Jesus began to talk about it. Certainly he reminded them of what was written about him in Isaiah chapter 53, starting at verse 4, because he was explaining to them about what all the prophets had said about him. And so in Isaiah 53, verse 4, it says, "Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. And by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us turned to our own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." Gee, I wonder who that is describing. I wonder. And he continues to talk with them. Maybe he talks with them about Psalm 22, where Jesus references this psalm, crying out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And in verse 12, there's an eerily similar description of Jesus' death written hundreds of years before it ever took place. He says, "I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet." All written about Jesus, the coming Messiah, God's rescuer, hundreds of years before his arrival. And these are just three. Scripture is filled with hundreds of these prophecies concerning Jesus. And here Jesus is explaining all of it to Clopas and his companion, who are struggling with what has happened. How do we know? What does this mean? There are over 300 prophecies about Jesus that he fulfilled, spoken of in Moses and the prophets. And Peter Stoner writes in his book, Science Speaks, that the chance of any one person fulfilling these prophecies would be 1 in 10 to the 17th power. I can't even count that high. I don't know, just 1 in 1 to 17 zeros after it, meaning Jesus wanted to give them a reason or reasons to believe, even in the midst of their doubt, even while they're still struggling. Jesus wants them to know that he's alive, that he's not dead, even in their failure to recognize him, because he loved them, just as he loves you, just as he loves me. And reality is, because of that love, Jesus gives us reason after reason after reason to believe in him. Scriptures are full of them. Some of you see me carrying little Maddie around here today. I've been holding her down and dipping her down to pick up these little Easter eggs because she's having trouble walking. Her knee got hurt this last week. We had that storm that came through, and just to be safe, I flipped my trampoline over upside down so the wind can't come pick it up and throw it across the yard. And so the next day when the weather got better, I came and I flipped it back over, and I'm putting the net up around it, and the kids can't wait. They're up, they're at my feet, they're jumping around. Yay! They're all excited. You know how it is. You guys need to get on a trampoline more often. And so they're playing around by my feet, and all of a sudden Maddie starts crying. It's like, my goodness, what's going on? And so I reach down and I pick her up, and she's like, my knee hurts, my knee hurts, my knee hurts. She's rubbing the back of it. I think, well, she'll walk it off, right? She'll walk it off. Day goes by, another day goes by. She can't even put weight on it. And every time we try to help her, she just cries. And so I took her to the doctor's office on Monday morning. And while we were there, I'm talking to the doctor, and she's like, man, the knee looks good. It's not swelling. I'm not sure if it's psychological. Like, she's just afraid that if she steps on it, it's going to hurt. I don't know. But, I don't think I do an x-ray. I think I just wait. And so I take her home, and all week long, right, we've had to deal with Maddie. How do you think we dealt with her? Do you think we were just like, Maddie, you got to figure it out? We'll set you here on the couch. Good luck. God bless you. Do you think that's how we dealt with our daughter? Daddy, I got to go potty. Sorry. No. That's not how we dealt with it. And when she says, I need up on the chair, we go down, we scoop her up. We put her up on the chair. When she says, I want to go upstairs to my room, we pick her up, we carry her upstairs, we put her in her room. When she wants to go outside, we find a chair, we bring her outside, we set her in a swing, we do something. We don't just leave her there to figure it out on her own. We're there, and she knows and has confidence in us. And she knows that as long as we're there until her leg feels better, we're going to be there to help her. We're her hope. We're her hope. We've given her reasons to hope in us, to believe in us, and trust us. We've given her reasons for her entire life in the form of caring for her and helping her and affirming her with our words and actions. And she can trust in us because we've shown ourselves to be trustworthy, just like what we see Jesus doing in the Scriptures. Just like what we see him doing in the Scriptures. And even more so, this is what Moses declared in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your own people. You must listen to him. And over what we see in the Scriptures is that God raised up prophets. He raised up leaders. He raised up judges, ultimately culminating in the person of Jesus Christ, who is not dead, but is very much alive. And my friends, he is our hope. He is our living hope, and he's given us every reason to believe. So as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him. They urged him strongly, stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day is almost over. And so he went to stay with them. And when he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he disappeared. That would freak me out, right? He disappeared. He disappeared from their sight. And they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the Scriptures to us? And they got up at once and they returned to Jerusalem. And there they found the 11 and those with them assembled together, saying, it is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon. Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. And what we notice here, my friends, what we notice is the disciples' response as they're compelled by Jesus' words and actions. Notice their response is quite interesting. First of all, they invite him to stay with them. right? They invite him to stay with them. There's something about him they just can't get enough of. Later on, we see that described as this burning in their hearts as he spoke. There's just something about him. There's just something about this guy. We need him to stay with us just a little bit longer. There's something about him. But then there's another response. And that response is to break bread with him. Right? Not just merely give him a place to stay because it's late. It's late, you know, we're kind of acquaintances. Why don't you come into our house? No, they invite him to break bread. They invite him into a deeper fellowship where they can share a meal around a table and continue to listen and interact with one another. You see, in the ancient world, breaking bread was seen as something intimate, something personal, a place where family gathered to share life with each other. That was their second response. And then we have their third response, right? After he disappears, and they're like, no! We have their third response. Where'd he go? Jesus. Their third response. After their eyes are open and they believe, they can't help but go back and travel the 7 miles they had just traveled, right? 7 miles there, 7 miles back, round trip, 14 miles. Do the math, right? This is not just like walking across your neighbor's yard to borrow some butter. Okay, this is a long way. 7 miles to tell others about what they had seen and experienced. 7 miles to tell people Jesus is alive. These were their responses to Jesus' words and actions. And in a similar fashion, when I look at their responses, I'm challenged by, what is my response going to be? How am I going to respond to the fact that Jesus is alive after reading this account and walking through it together? Because it begs the question, how will we respond? How will we respond? What will our response be to the good news of Jesus, to the most important message that we could ever hear or we could ever receive, the good news, the gospel? How are we going to respond to that? I got to tell you, over this last year, it's been fun getting to know so many people. It's been a challenge to get to know so many people, but it's been fun getting to know so many people in our congregation and out in our community, and learning faces and names of people in the restaurants that I go to or get takeout from, or the businesses that I visited, meeting people from different churches, getting out and supporting different community events. But, you know, I got to tell you, this last year I had the privilege of meeting somebody by the name of Dwayne. Somebody by the name of Dwayne. And I first met Dwayne last year, somewhere around this time when that big tornado came through. And we had put together some groups of individuals that were going out. Some of you went, right, with Samaritan's Purse, and we were doing some cleanup after the tornado. And I remember one morning we met here, and I met this guy named Dwayne, and it was kind of fun. You know, we got to chat, we got to know each other. We're serving out in our community. And I was like, it was really cool. Well, the next weekend shows up, and there's another opportunity to go out and help with cleanup efforts. And guess who shows up again? Dwayne. Dwayne shows up, and we're out there, and we're working hard, and we're carrying branches and sticks, and, you know, we're drinking water because it's ridiculously hot outside, and we're serving, and we're getting to know one another. And, you know, that was really cool. And then, you know, I was talking to Tom, and we had set up some dates that we were going to go out and work at Habitat for Humanity. And we put these dates together. And guess who shows up again? Dwayne. Yeah, good. Yeah. Dwayne. He's like, Dwayne. Yeah. Dwayne shows up again. He shows up again, and he's there, and, you know, we're putting siding on, and we're using these little saws, and we're cutting stuff, and they won't let me use it because when I use tools, I tend to hurt myself. Okay? But Dwayne is there again, and then we did this community impact event just a couple of weeks ago, where the community was doing Race for the Green, where you can do like a 5K or a half marathon. And we're setting up in tables and medals and awarding people. And guess who shows up? Yes! Dwayne shows up again. And it just seems like every time our church has an opportunity to go and be present in our community through those community impact events, Dwayne shows up. And not only Dwayne, but so many others. Some of you, you don't even wait for the community events. You just get out there and you represent the church. But man, what an example. What an example for us. And it just inspires me. It inspires me to get out there and represent the church, represent Jesus in my community. This is a way we can respond to the gospel like Clopas and his companion by being present in our community. And for many of us, when we talk about the response to the fact that Jesus is alive, this is our next step. This is our next step, to go and be present in the lives of the people around us. There's a burning in our heart, like we read about in this text, a burning that is compelling us to go out and get active, in our community, serve people, and tell people about the love of Jesus. Jesus, who is alive. And we are specifically celebrating today on this Easter morning. My friends, there's an opportunity before us to do that in a very practical way through our Marketplace Multipliers gathering breakfast that we've been talking about. Right? Because some of us, it's hard for us to get out and represent Jesus. It's hard for us to tell people about Jesus because it just gets super awkward. We get out there and begin a conversation like, so do you know where you're going to go when you die? And they're like, in the ground? Or those kinds of things. And we just, there's an intimidation factor about it. But listen, some of us, we're experiencing this burning in our heart. And we got to do something. And Marketplace Multipliers is an opportunity that's designed to make sharing your faith not weird, not hard, how to naturally do it in your place of work, in your school, wherever you find yourself, in your neighborhood. And that's our next step. We need to get out there and be present in our community. Maybe that's not in Marketplace Multipliers. It's a great opportunity, but it might be something else. That's our next step, to get out there and be present. Others of us, listen, Jesus is inviting us to break bread. Jesus is inviting us to break bread. He's calling us to a relationship with him, or a deeper relationship with him, a more intimate relationship with him, a relationship that's like family. And we know we're not there yet, but we want to be. We're ready. I'm in. I want this. I want to know Jesus in a deeper way, and that's our next step. But then maybe some are here today because it's Easter. Somebody invited you, and this is what you're supposed to do. It's Easter, right? That's what people do. They go to church on Easter. And yeah, it's been great. It's been fun. You've played some games. You watched the pastor's stand fall off the platform. You thought it was hilarious. You had some food, maybe got to know some nice people, but I'm not sure what you think about this Jesus thing quite yet. Curious, but you're not quite sure. And might I suggest your response today, like Clopas and his companions, is just maybe to stick around a little bit longer. Just stick around a little bit longer and see what it's all about. Because sooner or later, my hope is that you'll discover Jesus. You'll discover that Jesus is alive and you'll recognize him.